Hello and welcome. I'm Carolyn Grimminger with the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Our program's mission is to nourish the mind and spirit and serve social justice. Our forums occur on most Sundays at noon and are free and open to the public. We encourage you to attend. Our church is physically located at 4700 Grover Avenue in Austin, Texas. For more information about our Public Affairs Forum, you can go to our church website at www.austinuu.org. Today our speaker is David Nair. He is going to be speaking about empathy. David is a 25-year practitioner and teacher of empathy as a transformative tool. He is the founder of the Austin NVC community, Nonviolent Communication, which holds weekly practice meetings and workshops, welcoming the public to learn and share this valuable tool. David is also the CEO of a technology incubator, an experienced business executive and social entrepreneur. His formal education includes mathematics, South Asian studies, linguistics, organizational behavior, business, economics, and medicine. David is inspired by all dimensions of human potential and has a personal practice that includes several forms of mind and physical training. He has been internationally recognized for setting 116 juggling world records. He has lived in 5 countries and worked in 10. Let's welcome Mr. Nair.
Hello. So the topic that we picked for today was empathy. And how many of you had some communication about what we were doing today, just so I have some idea? Some of you. Okay, so I'll assume that you don't necessarily understand any of the questions or any of the pieces. How many of you have some idea that you know what empathy is? Okay. Let me ask the question, what is empathy as you understand it?
An emotional and an intellectual sort of feeling of what the other person is feeling and thinking.
Okay, sure. That's a piece of empathy. So an intellectual or an emotional understanding of what someone else is experiencing is what you said. Any other ideas what empathy is? For me, it's the topic of a book 400 pages long. So there's more there. What else is part of empathy?
Putting yourself in the other's place.
Yeah, so putting yourself in the other person's shoes. You've heard that definition, yeah? Something that is not something is a part of the definition. What is it positively? Maybe understanding.
Well, I would say that Adolf Hitler had what you call charismatic empathy. He was able to play on that and really get to a lot of people.
So charismatic empathy. So help me understand what you mean.
Well, you know what the word charisma means.
No, I understand what charm is, and charisma is part of that.
Okay, well, does anyone not know what the word charismatic means? To get people, one way is like getting people's strong attention.
Okay, there you go. I like that. Getting someone's strong attention. So how would getting someone's strong attention be related to empathy specifically? So this was the idea of enhancing your message so that it's heard, or hearing some messages rather than other messages, right? Or directing the agenda, as you said, what I'm doing. Right, I'm directing the agenda. So right now, I am not empathizing. Would we agree on that? Yes. So that's another useful definition of what is empathy and what is not empathy. And I'll offer that neither one of them are right or wrong. They are one thing or the other. I'll ask you to suspend your judgment of whether something is correct or not. So one of the characteristics of empathy is the definition that I like, which I take out of the writing of my first teacher in this, who was Marshall Rosenberg. Marshall Rosenberg wrote a book called Nonviolent Communication, The Language of Compassion, which I highly recommend. And the short definition that he had is, there's a handout here, which we could actually share on the website if you wanted. Number 1, empathy is the respectful understanding of what others or we internally are experiencing. And for me, there's a key piece of that, which is respectful. Respectful, which is what I heard you asking for. So in understanding, we're trying to create the space to be fully understood, and also for the listener to have space to be able to understand. It's a collaborative, cooperative experience of creating understanding between parties. Okay, so I would like to understand what's going on with him, and I would like you to understand what's going on with me. And how are we going to play that game? It's interactive, which is why I'm standing down here instead of up on the podium, and why I asked you to be in closer. And why I'm looking around at your faces, because I'm wanting to know how what I'm saying is landing with you, and I'm reading your emotional expressions. What do you take out of that? What have you got for a definition of empathy? Something interesting? Anything alive?
Connection.
Connection. So there's a purpose behind empathy, which is connection. Why would you want to respectfully understand someone?
So they will be able to freely express. So they'll be able to freely express what they're thinking and their ideas and their feeling, and there'll be a greater exchange between you and that person.
Yeah. So if you're going to take actions, wouldn't it be valuable to understand what's happening with the parties that are involved in or the stakeholders who have the consequence of those actions? Right? So, I'm going to go back to a definition of what is empathy. For me, this is a subject I have a lot of excitement about. I want to just make sure we get that. I see some open eyes. At least you're not all asleep. And I'm going to go back to those two words. Yeah, there. Can you hear me now? Good. There's batteries. All right, I'm going to continue. You're going to work on the batteries over here. Ignore the man behind the screen. So there's two elements, respectful and understanding. So for respectful, when somebody is sharing an experience or when somebody is wanting to be understood, respectful for me says they are the expert of that experience. So when okay. Hello, can you, oh, awesome. Somebody's on that switchboard. Yeah. So here I would distinguish, empathy is understanding me, and support is helping me. For me, this is a key distinction between what I'll describe as compassion, trying to ease and meet other people's needs, ease suffering, right? When you say compassion is the reducing of suffering in others, it's supporting, and empathy. Empathy is respectful understanding. Wouldn't you like, when you support someone with compassion, to know enough about them that your compassion is effective and mindful and considerate and what they're asking for? So we would like to, I certainly would like to be compassionate. I would like to, so part of my compassion is to share learning that I value, hopefully to affect and contribute to other people's lives. I heard the sound cut out. And in order to do that, I'm going to try to engage in dialogue to understand what's going on with you, so that I am, my compassion actually contributes. And in order to be compassionate, so I'm arguing you need to be empathetic. In order to be empathetic, you might want to care about the person you're listening to. They go hand in hand. I find I've run into situations where there's a lack of empathy because there's a lack of caring. I have a cartoon. So now we're talking about this idea of respectful. So in order to understand, we need to create enough space for one or the other party to actually hear. So I don't know if somebody can zero in on this. So this is a cartoon. I'll describe it. There's two chickens. They're on opposite sides of a road. And the first chicken says, "How do I get to the other side?" Now there's a cliché. And the chicken standing on the other side says, "You are on the other side." Okay? So I would perhaps say that the second chicken doesn't know how to be in the shoes or in the feet of the first chicken. He doesn't get it, doesn't have empathy, right? So this for me is an example of the failure of empathy, right? I want you to understand, and the first chicken is asking for support. Hey, How do I get to the other side? He can't get support because the second chicken doesn't understand. He's saying, you don't need support, right? For me, this is probably the short summary of most of the conflict I run into. Make sense? Okay. So respectful understanding would be to be able to hear the other chicken for what's going on. And yeah, you can hand them around. So then the second piece of this is, what is actually understanding? That for me is a very large topic. What's understanding? How do you know you understand? Well, I mean, how do you know that you understand something? That's an even harder. I bet that's a real struggle for you.
Oh, you get clues from the other person.
Oh, I like that. There's dialogue. That's why I keep asking you questions. I actually want to make sure that what I'm saying lands and you get it. So I'm asking for feedback, like I'm looking at eyes and seeing there's a sort of a look of wonder over here. Yeah, wonder, yeah. And so, understanding, I think, needs to be confirmed. I might have some idea of something or some perspective or some background or some level of experience, and I might know the meaning of something, but I'm never really quite sure that you understand the meaning of it.
You gotta wait for me, please.
Yeah. So I'm going to repeat that. She said, you know your meaning of that. You might not know my meaning of that. I think that's a really great idea to hold when you go back to respectful, right? So I have my perceptions, my evaluations of things. One of the lessons I really like is the distinction between a moralistic judgment and a value judgment. Moralistic judgment: this soup sucks. I hate this soup. Value judgment: I don't think I like the taste of this soup. Which one is easier to hear? The one that presumes that the world understands that the soup sucks and that you speak for the entire world, moralistic judgment, or the one that leaves room for your, consideration whether you like the soup or not? Or I could even be clearer. Oh, I see the soup has ginger in it, and I don't really like the taste of ginger. Oh, I like soup that's a little cold because I don't like to burn my mouth. I would like to let it cool. I could give even more and more clear ways of saying what was going on with me that leaves you as a listener room to have your own experience of the world and also get me. And if I speak in a moralistic judgment, I haven't necessarily left respectful room for your experience of the world. That might leave you less interested in understanding me. So there's two sides to this respectful understanding. Both the sharer of information can be clear and leave room for the listener, and the listener can try to empathize and leave room for the sharer. Oh, there's even more engagement here.
To me, this points out the value of knowing how to respectfully disagree with someone.
Okay, there, I like that. So that for me, when I see podiums, I think of debates. So a common debate practice is, I'll offer an argument, and the other person says, no, that argument is not the correct argument, I'll offer my argument. And they say, well, this argument and that argument and this argument, as opposed to, I heard that argument, this is what in that idea I hear is valuable to you. And let me offer, that argument may be incomplete because I have my own understanding of the world. Let me offer another point of view which we might want to consider. And then we offer points of view, and then we collaborate on finding a solution that works from all points of view. For me, this is the respectful part of it, right? So repeat again what you said.
Well, the value of knowing how to respectfully disagree with someone else. And I know people, believe me, who have never learned that in their lives. And it hurts them terribly. I didn't learn the value until I was probably 40 years old.
Yes, so I'll translate another way to say that. So respectfully disagree would be to say, I understand what you're saying, or I think I'm trying to understand what you're saying. This is your idea, and I might reflect it back. So part of empathy is what you've heard is to reflect it back. I hear you would like people to learn how to respectfully disagree. And what does respectfully disagree mean? I hear your idea. I see your point of view. I'm trying to understand it from your point of view. This is the respectful part of it. And I don't agree with your interpretation. Let me offer my ideas, and we'll try to respectfully understand each other. Make sense? Oh, I have more. It's good. Now we're getting more interactive. Give me that microphone.
No, I gotta hold
No, all right. Oh, because I'll explode with next to each other. I got it.
Okay.
Don't want explosion.
Yeah. Vis-a-vis my professional background in differential psychology, that is Myers-Briggs and all the other stuff,
Okay.
there are certain personality types who, they're hardwired. They have and you can't fault them for it, but they have an aversion for any kind of disagreement.
Yeah. Okay. So let's
no
come
matter
back.
how the disagreement
All
is
right. I like that
expressed.
idea. So let me reflect what I heard there is some people find disagreeing difficult. Some people find messages of wrongness about what they've shared difficult to hear. Some people, so this is a need.
It's like having an emotional, to some people it's like having an emotional quarrel.
Right. So
If you have a controversial
So I'll repeat it. For some people, it's like having a charged emotional a quarrel. So it could threaten someone's sense of safety to hear wrongness or disagreement. Is that a fair interpretation? And he says you're wired that way. Some people are wired. So and I'm going to interpret that a little bit. So you can have enough repeated experiences, or you could have very early experiences where hearing disagreement is just really painful for you. You have emotional wiring that's triggered, and it's the same quality of pain that you might have from getting burned or getting hurt. That emotional pain is just a trigger of pain. And this goes back to respectful. I'll tie it back in empathy. Know that discussions with some people, and maybe the people who are closest to you, or some circumstances, are hard to hear for others. And some people, we have the chicken, wherever that went, some people may not be able to empathize. So what I would offer is know when you're asking for empathy and whether you're getting it or not. This is just a very simple level of awareness. Are you shouting across the road to a chicken? Are you being clear about what you're asking? Because another way to say that is the first chicken was very unclear. I'll be the second chicken. You're very unclear. What do you mean get to the other side of the road? From my point of view, you're already there. Are you wanting to get to my side of the road? Are you talking to me? Help me be, could you be clearer? Now we're saying it's the first chicken that doesn't have empathy. And so know that. So that in asking for something, there's a point of view. Again, I'm asking for a sort of empathy here. I want to just go back to this respectfully disagreeing for a second. We'll come back to Denise. I recognize Denise. What I hear in that, for me, is a fundamental point, which is we each have our own experience, and we can communicate about our experience from our point of view. Respectful, for me, says that we recognize there are different points of view. That's an implicit part of that idea. And respectful disagreement is to say, oh, there are different points of view here. And now we're looking for collaboration or consensus or some shared solution around different points of view. And I'm a fan of saying, well, that means we do have adequate understanding. I heard your point over here, which is some people have trouble with that understanding, or that the process to come to shared understanding, if it comes through not a disagreement or a message of wrongness, can be difficult. So just be aware of that. I believe that empathy is, so I'll come around to another thing. I believe empathy is quite learnable. And even people who have hard wiring where emotional pain is very challenging, it is possible to apply empathy and change the quality of the connection, right? My experience is it's a fairly rare case that is impossible. In which case, if you run even into that rare case, you can apply that empathy to yourself around the struggle you're having connecting, and that will transform the way you experience it. Is that helpful? Great. It's great. For me, this is awesome.
You covered what I was going to say.
All right, awesome. All right, so we're that celebration around that.
It seems one of the things that either heightens or diminishes the empathy, I don't know what's happening to my tongue, is the milieu, the environment in which one is. So for example, here this is built to have a pretty wide open amount of empathy. When you go into situations like courtrooms or perhaps a legislative
Yes.
area, the whole area is conditioned perhaps to have a different relationship. And we've seen, for example, over the last several decades within legislative bodies, and sadly, a loss of the empathy that perhaps in a formal setting of the same people would have not been seen in the formal legislative environment, but outside of that would have worked, but now it doesn't.
All right, so let me interpret your question and see if I got it. I'll take a head note. So what you're saying is, beware of structure. It can affect the quality of empathy, that the social structures we're in and political structures we're in can make it even harder on us. And I'll give you an example. You said here we're relatively open to this discussion. But notice that I transformed this discussion. I was asked to stand on a podium and give a lecture for 40 minutes. I was asked, and that's not what I did. So within the extent that I could reach out and be a vulnerable person making a request about what I thought would work, and I had the ability, even in this environment, to transform it a little more into a dialogue with more understanding. All right, so now that's not, I don't want to diminish your question because there's more there. So to the extent that I could affect this environment, I actually tried to transform it into more of an active dialogue around empathy. I asked people to move closer. I got off the forum. I tried to coach the cameras to know what I'm doing. I asked for a microphone to go around, which is also not understand the normal forum is. So now we're going to go back to, I absolutely agree with you. Marshall Rosenberg, at the end of his life, focused almost all of his work on social justice and social change. So I'll give you, so as a form of sharing that I think I understand what you're saying, I will tell a story. And storytelling is one of those things that I have on a list, is not empathy. But it can be empathy if it's an attempt to relate that maybe I get it. I'll come back to you, okay? One of the stories he describes is you're standing on the side of a river and you're seeing babies floating by in a basket. And the first thing you want to do when you see that is dive into the river and rescue the baby. And while you're doing that, you see 2 babies floating by. And you grab as many as you can, struggling to swim and catch them and bring them to shore. And as you do that, you see more and more and more babies floating by in baskets. Right? And this is his experience traveling around the world, coaching empathy and coaching nonviolence. That for him there was an overwhelming need to create social change and awareness about empathy and structure. And he was overwhelmed, and he asked himself not to jump in the river and go after the first baby he saw, but instead to step back and go upstream and see, where are these babies coming from and what can I do? And maybe that's what I'm hearing you say is, what can we do to the political forums we're in and the social forums we're in, which limit our ability to respectfully understand each other? Is that your question?
Yes, that is, and my concern is that there has, certainly in the legislative forums that we see throughout a lot of the political world now, there's been a marked change from over the last several decades. And
This is the
what are the difference between what's happened now and how things worked better, one would
So
submit
this is
in
the
past.
polarization of a fight as a political structure versus collaborative understanding and writing legislation. My understanding of legislation was people used to get together and come up with a solution that worked for everybody, as opposed to arguing one or the other polarized agenda. And it's a real sadness I have, my understanding of it. And when I listen to, for me, people who are heroes in communicating, like Walter Cronkite, that's a message I hear directly from him, that we're not in a political forum that works on collaborative means. We're shared understanding, respectful understanding, in order to find a solution that works for everyone. So thank you for that. For me is answering the question, why do you care about empathy? Because it transforms the lives that we're in, and it particularly can be powerful on a larger setting. Thank you. And now we have back to she was very, so she was actually, are you okay with her? Are you good? Yeah.
I think several times you used disagreement and wrongful messaging, or message of wrongfulness.
Message of wrong.
message of wrong as
Yeah.
like almost the same thing, and I see them as very different.
They are. So thank you for clarifying that. So a disagreement was like I might propose a strategy that says, I'm going to stand here instead of standing on the podium. And we might disagree about whether that works or not. It might not work for the camera, but it would work for me. Okay? So we're going to have to figure that out. We have a disagreement, and that isn't necessarily wrong. We're exploring different points of view and different understandings in order to come up with a collaborative answer. Those are disagreements. And I would say a disagreement has to do with which strategy are we going to choose to solve something. And I make a distinction between a universal human need like understanding and contribution, very abstract things that I'm trying to do now, and the strategy. I'm going to do that with this microphone standing here where I am, talking in this method. That's a disagreement. Message of wrongness is different, at least the way I want to use it. So message of wrongness is you're hearing my strategy, or you're hearing my criticism of your strategy, or you're hearing the alternative strategy I'm proposing, and you're interpreting it as I'm calling you wrong, or I'm saying that your strategy is wrong somehow. I'll often use the word, sometimes intending to say wrong because I'm upset, and I haven't figured out a better way to say it. I'll say it's incomplete. Your idea is incomplete. It's actually a quote out of Star Wars. I think Darth Vader is fighting with his, about to be discovered son, Luke Skywalker, and he says, I see your training is incomplete. It's just more powerful. I don't mean it as a message of wrongness. Did that help you?
I don't see when disagreement becomes message of wrongness.
Yeah, so when does disagreement become a message of wrongness?
The first part of the sentence comes, and then there is the word but.
Okay.
I hear you, but.
All right. So, it's sort of waiting for the second shoe to. So the second shoe to fall is the way I heard yours. The message of wrongness is how you interpret what's happening. So I don't know how I've created a message of wrongness to you. It's something going on inside of you based on what I've shared. It can be my tone. It can be a sense of my intention. It can be what's going on within you. But there's some messages you've heard around how I've shared that you interpret as I am seeing what you're saying as wrong. And it may also be something that you internally have generated. I'm trying to distinguish living in a world of understanding and living in a world of right and wrong. And I value judgment and right and wrong because it allows me to make decisions and go about my day in what otherwise would be an overly complex world. So I make a judgment that, well, actually right now while I'm talking to you, my wife and what would have been me would have been leading a workshop that's going on about 6 miles away from here. And I made a choice. I'm going to step out of leading that workshop and we're going to do this presentation. I made a choice. Which one is right or wrong? Well, right now for me, this is the right choice. Because I think I can reach a group of people who I otherwise wouldn't have reached, and she could still support the workshop. So I had to make a choice. So I'm deciding what's right and wrong in my world, but I could hear a message of wrongness when someone offers an alternative, and I think they're not listening to me. I'm not being understood. I'm the first chicken, and I say, oh, you don't get me. The chicken on the other side of the road is wrong. There's a breakdown maybe in empathy. And it can be a breakdown internally in terms of empathy.
It actually happens on both sides.
Yeah, and yes.
The person is perceiving conflict.
Yeah. So when a person is receiving conflict or interpreting conflict, and either side could hear the message of wrongness is the way I heard that. Yeah. Yeah. I will repeat people when they talk, so I'll do that. So I will help you. And you didn't know you needed to wear gym shoes.
So just to build on what she was saying, it also is a matter of judgment. I mean, if the wrongness comes in when I begin to judge what you're saying as wrong, and put a tone to it, and other things, that then immediately I think change the whole situation. So. Yeah. There's no longer an even listening and a fair and respectful listening. There's a well, you're wrong and I'm right kind of thing that begins to happen.
So let me let me reflect. So there's an element here about asking how does judgment play in this, and right and wrong is about judgment. So I'm going to slightly pause that to go on a little parallel path. Let me ask the question: does empathy include right and wrong and judgment in it? Does empathy include right and wrong, the notion of right and wrong, and judgment?
For example, I might misjudge somebody. I might misjudge them and feel. Okay, right and wrong in this sense, I might honestly misjudge someone and experience empathy for them.
Okay, go
ahead.
Okay, all right. So there's an example. I might be listening to somebody and I don't get it. And I can say, oh, I didn't get it. Okay? I'm not evaluating them as right and wrong. I'm evaluating my ability to understand them as right and wrong. So there's a quality of judgment around whether I'm succeeding. Is that what you were saying?
Not quite. I think close.
Oh yeah, I'm going to explode.
That is to say, I can misjudge someone because I misunderstood them for whatever reason.
Yeah, okay, so you can misjudge or misunderstand someone. Let me offer...
But I could experience empathy for them when really, if I knew the truth, empathy would not be warranted by
Okay,
them.
so this might actually be an advertisement for if I could spend my judgment of them and listen deeply, I might get them. So I'll tell you, I have a bias towards answering that question, that if you could suspend your judgment, this might be one of the really useful tools for empathizing and understanding someone else. And if you are empathizing with someone and when you want to know that you get them, I'll go back to that word respectful. The person who knows whether you've gotten them or not is probably the person you're empathizing with. So the expert of that experience, we went back to, we all have our own individual experience. If I'm empathizing with you and trying to hear your question, I'm going to ask you, did I get it? And how is that going to happen unless I've reflected back what I've heard? This is in the old days of dial-up modems. This is a duplex conversation. I'm going to get a signal from you, and then I'm going to say, hey, here's the checksum of that information. Did I receive your information correctly? And you're going to be the expert, and you're going to say, yeah, you got me. Or wait a second, I may have said that I'm really uncomfortable with the way you parked your car, but when I think about it, that's not really what's going on. What's going on is I wish I had your car, and I'm jealous. And so sometimes even in the process of empathizing, this goes to the second quote. I'm going to stop holding the chickens here. By maintaining our attention on what's going on within others, we offer them a chance to fully explore and express their interior selves. So actually, in the process of empathy, somebody's understanding of their own world may change. And in the process of feeding back their world to them, if you're a psychologist, hey, this is the world that you're experiencing. Let me share it with you as part of behavioral therapy. Or those things that come out of Carl Rogers, which is, hey, I'm going to empathize with your world. When somebody really gets their own world, they might say, gosh, I might want to stop doing some of the things that are not really contributing to my world. Or I might want to think about it differently, just because now I have a deeper understanding of it, because you've listened to me, and now I've had a chance to listen to me. Does that make sense?
It makes sense if people are able to take the time and space to hear all that.
Yeah.
But here's the word.
So for me, just if you're okay pausing right there, you hit for me a beautiful second point. So the first, I like the idea of, hey, how does judgment play in empathy? And I would say you need judgment in order to manage your world. So I don't think you can set aside judgment. So, but know what is judgment and what is not judgment, and if you can leave judgment out of the respectful understanding of somebody else, to give them their world and to try to respect that, while also respecting how it landed on you. Oh my goodness, when I heard that, I felt upset, but this is my world, it's not your world. I go back to listening to you, both chickens. And now you've offered the second thing, which is, repeat it again?
Let's see, I think what I don't remember. Whatever I said, I don't remember.
Urgency, space. Or this is the way, right?
Space. space for people to really speak what they're trying to say instead of
So
quickly
let me ask
judging that.
you, so one of the things that's always a concern for me is when someone says, I want you to empathize with me, and I've got at least 8 seconds before I have to get on my phone and talk to my daughter. So I really would like an in-depth understanding of everything that's going on in my life, and it's overwhelming, and okay, I'm sorry, the time. For me, empathy and the tyranny of the clock, I'll use a phrase that I like, the tyranny of the clock, are stressful. So here's the way I look at it. My understanding is the portion of the brain that uses emotions and values emotions and benefits from emotions, a very large portion of the brain in our wiring, has absolutely no sense of time. And that's for me, that's kind of startling. So we have a pain or a hurt that happened, even before we were verbal, or last week. That same pain and that same emotional experience are tied together completely outside of the clock. When I empathize with someone and I want to deeply understand them, I value the emotional experience because it is part of that experience. Like frustration with the political system and the social structure that doesn't invite sufficient understanding for collaborative, real solutions. Did I summarize that well? Yeah, okay. So, right, and I see less frustrated and delighted, right? So the emotional processing of that, when I look at your faces, I have a chance to capture your general sense, right? So I really value the emotional body, and there are large tools for understanding the emotional body, hearing it as a messenger of needs, exchanging things that are really important, but that has no sense of time in it. So when I empathize with someone, we may need to explore something which is the tentacle of something very deep. So I'll give an example. I remember when I showed up, my treasured Volvo station wagon at the end of its life started emitting blue smoke out of the trunk. And luckily I was in front of a Jiffy Lube. There, I'll name a brand on TV. And I just barely rolled into the Jiffy Lube service center. And I had to get somewhere because I was opening a church for 40 jugglers who were all going to juggle. And I thought I was urgent. I had a key. I needed to help these 40 people who would be locked out. And I engaged with the manager of that, and I was so frustrated with him not helping. In the end, he helped my car. He put fluids in. He took care of me. He didn't charge me anything. He jumped me around the line. But my experience of all of that was that he was not helping me fast enough. Right? This is my point of view, because I was in an emotional state that just didn't know how to equate the world. So, can empathy be done in a hurry? Empathy requires the time that it takes. We also need to live in a world that has clocks and has coordination and values and respects the time of other people. Like I'm aware of, we've got another 20 minutes. There's a clock over there. Thank you for providing that structure. And now I need to balance those needs. So I understand I might be a little bit nervous because there's a clock running, and I want deep understanding. Yeah. Now, we're back to now. Yes.
I've experienced, maybe some of you folks, everybody here.
Wait a second.
I have recently experienced, and maybe some of you folks have, is what I call empathy overload.
Perfect.
That is to say, the Mexico City disaster and,
Awesome.
and the Las Vegas shooting, the flooding in the Texas coast, all of that together, if you get your mind right, it bowls you over.
All right, lovely. For me, this is, this is empathy overload and overwhelm, right? When I want to stop empathizing, or I'm not able to empathize. So I'm going to say I'm going to use a different description of this. What's the difference between empathy and sympathy? And for me, so I don't believe you get empathetic overload. When I'm in a place where I've created the space to listen, and I've created a practice forum, and I've organized my life so that I have the time to do it, and I've sorted out and understand myself enough so that I'm living a life in my own values, I have a very rich experience of empathizing, because now I get to touch people's personal worlds, and I'm closer and more connected to my own world and their world than I've ever experienced in my life. It's enormously joyful, even though it may be amazingly sad for them. Or like, I'll give an example. My wife's ex-husband is currently near the end of his life, and she's in great pain around it. But the quality of sharing she has around it and the realness of that connection is enormously enriching for me, as long as I don't get confused between empathy and sympathy. So you offered...
that was going to be my question when we got to sympathy versus empathy, because I think it's so important to distinguish the two.
Yeah.
What, to me, the difference is if I'm sympathetic, that involves a part of pity. And I don't find that very helpful if I'm trying to help somebody, if I feel sorry for them and woe is them. I try to find the strengths in people instead of the weaknesses.
All right, so I hear your distinction. So, and the part of your distinction that at least resonates with me is the I. That's all that I heard in there. That is the I. So when there's something going on in you that you're serving, I would say that that's sympathy. So one way I describe this is, I don't know how many of you are guitar players. We heard guitar earlier today. There are two E strings on a guitar, and there's an A string commonly tuning. If you pluck one of the E strings, the other E string will vibrate because it's in a harmonic, and the A string will probably vibrate because it's a fifth off. It's another harmonic. They'll vibrate. So when you pluck the E string on a guitar, you'll hear a tone which is more than just that string vibrating. It has the other strings sympathetically vibrating. And an East Asian Indian sitar has a lot of sympathetic strings. That's why it sounds like has that sound. Those are sympathetic vibrations to the primary tune. Okay?
The technical word for that is also syntonic.
Syntonic, okay. Yeah. Okay. So when somebody shares something going on in their life, even one chicken, how do I get to the other side? You're already there. I'm imagining let's imagine that the second chicken has a sympathetic trigger that the other side just gets him in a lot of trouble. He becomes the butt of all sorts of jokes. Just don't talk about getting to the other side. Man, I don't want to hear that stuff. I want to be known as a chicken in my own right. I just want to live where I am. Stop making fun of me. Right? So he's now sympathetically triggered about this whole other side joke, that he can't listen to the other guy, and it's very painful. So I'll give a different sympathetic. A sympathetic trigger is what comes up in you when you are stimulated by something in the outside world or inside of you. So I'm listening and I'm empathizing to you, and you hear pity, right? And so something comes. Do I understand pity? What does pity mean to me? How do I react to pity? This is all things going on inside of me. That's my sympathetic reaction. If I actually want to know what you mean by pity, where am I going to look? I have to ask you about it. So if I stay in your world, I'm being empathetic. If something comes up inside of me, that's sympathetic. If my daughter were to tell me that she's having trouble in school, I might have a reaction because of my needs to support, to show care, to just out of compassion, I want to see her thrive. So that's contribution. Those are all needs inside of me. That's not her. If she's saying she's having trouble in school, she might be saying, I want to change my major, or I want to find a different school. I don't know. I haven't asked her. She's having trouble. What does that mean? Empathy would be asking her, what does she mean by that? I don't think she's having trouble in school. Empathy would be asking that question of her. Sympathy is how I'm interpreting and what's coming up inside of me. So now I'm going to go back to the question with recent events, with I'm guessing mass shootings, or flooding, or the fires that we had in Bastrop. For me, the fires, and I had a tremendous sympathetic reaction to the fires in Bastrop, because I had a business that burned down, and I lived 1.5 miles away from Steiner Ranch, and I could smell the fires. Literally, they just had to come over one more hill that would have burned my house down. So I have trouble smelling smoke, even that yummy smoke you hear when you're walking around your neighborhood and somebody's burning their fireplace, and it's welcome to winter. That's that's a sympathetic trigger for me. Oh my goodness, fire and destruction. Yeah, so I am brought into a memory, especially an olfactory memory, very deep inside of me. And that is a sympathetic response. It's not empathetic. So I'm not overwhelmed by empathy. I am overwhelmed by issues inside of me that need support and understanding, or care, or compassion, or some quality of support which I am reminded of. So this goes back to what's the intention of chicken number 2. He may just be a smartass, is what I heard. Yeah. So they don't. So this will go another. This is another idea. I'll turn it into that. For empathy to work, you want a relationship of honesty and trust. Right? So empathy, honesty, and trust go together. If I want to empathize with you, I would love you to be honest. If you're not honest, I can't get your world. Yeah. You're not going to be honest, so this is a common issue with a parent. You want your child to be honest. Well, the only way that's ever going to work is if they share the truth with you, you're empathetic, as opposed to something else. Right? If there's consequence to what your child shares with you, they're going to very quickly learn not to be completely honest. Right? You can share concern. You can share, a need for support when they share something with you that's striking. There are collaborative ways around that. But if you're constantly offering punishment for honesty, guess what? Honesty goes away. Right? So honesty and empathy work together to create trust and relationship. And these chickens they may have that road down the middle because that's the way the world is going to be. They may not be clever.
I'd just like to hear a comment from you, because I picked up an idea from your talk, and that is about justice. Today we have people looking for justice as things happened in our history years ago, and they want to destroy a lot of history.
Yeah.
And they want justice, but they don't want justice without revenge. Would you comment on that, please?
Are you talking about Black Lives Matter and taking down statues?
I'm talking about, yes, and history and changing names and everything like this.
It's changing the name of Robert E. Lee next to Barton Springs into something else.
For an example.
Or as an example. I'll try to address it briefly. What I hear there is a request for respect. Hey, I had my experience. So if I'm someone who is concerned about a statuary, which was put there, I want you to understand my world and my experience of the world and what the statute means to me. And then there's another party over here that says, that's not what the statute means. The statute means this. Okay? And how do you solve that? Right? I'm standing right here, don't know exactly how to solve that. But I believe there needs to be adequate dialogue and respect. That's back to the political question of how do you actually form consensus. So there's a majority vote on an issue does not include all the minorities who aren't expressed in that consensus. And consensus for everything is such an arduous and lengthy task that nothing gets done. So now you have, again, between empathy and urgency. You have that battle between the tyranny of the clock and fully and richly understanding. So you would like a political process that works effectively to address those issues. Those things which need deep understanding, I'll offer. You get a group aside that develops that deep understanding, that is trusted enough, that has communication which is trusted enough that it can function. My greatest concern around this is the increasing message of distrust of information. I'm somebody who stands up here saying, hey, I really value empathy. Empathy is respectful understanding. That sounds a lot like I like people to communicate to each other. I really worry about communication being pointed at as dishonest or ineffectual or not a solution. I'm a fan of communication. And you said revenge.
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 Can
Yes,
you
I
have
didn't forget it.
Without revenge.
All right. So revenge is I hear it not as a universal human need. I don't think we are born as human beings across all space and time needing revenge. I hear it as a strategy. So I hear revenge as a strategy of potentially respect. I really want you to see my needs. I'm going to make them so blatantly, obviously clear that you need to listen to us, that I'm going to cause you pain. Right? It's equivalent to being a 3-year-old and standing on the dining room table and saying, nobody's playing with me, I want your attention. So revenge is, I hear it as an escalating strategy to get respect or support or attention or having your needs seen. Right? So I would hope that the person who is seeking revenge gets enough support that we could come up with other strategies that don't involve the pain of others. I happen to have a bias towards nonviolence. So I believe with adequate understanding, you can come up with a collaborative solution which doesn't involve violence. So I hear that you hear certain violence in the strategies that they offer, and you would like a different strategy that's respectful. Is that right? Yeah, justice without revenge. So that's not. So maybe in this setting, that's probably a transformation of the Old Testament to the New Testament. We're going to listen to Isaiah and find a solution in love. How's that for? Yeah,
we have a question from Luther.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, in trying to show empathy, where do you draw the line against those people who express abhorrent and ignorant opinions according to you, such as, I have no desire to be empathetic towards President Trump when he vocally says that, because he's rich and powerful, he can go and grab women by the panties. And so where do you draw the line in saying, I will show no empathy towards this?
Okay, so that for me talks to protective use of force. Okay, so I live in a world where I value empathy and collaborative understanding, collaborative solutions, and in some situations, I want to step in and use protective force where I see it protects needs and rights. Okay, so I'm not proposing the use of violence. I'm proposing the use of protection. Okay, and I'll give an example. My wife just recently saved a swimmer at Barton Springs. My wife maybe weighs 108 pounds. The swimmer weighed 180 pounds. He was a bodybuilder. It was interesting. And he said, I need help. And he went down and she swam over and calmed him. And together they got to the shore. For me, very impressive. She was using protective force. It turns out that whole experience, although there was clear support, he was actually collaborating with her. It required empathy afterwards. For the lifeguard that was upset that they missed it, for the guy who was just experienced, he's a strong, powerful guy, and he was cramping. Even the strongest people can have trouble swimming, and not to mention a skinny little woman, and comes over and is the person who helps. There's empathy needed around it, right? So you could step in and say no to someone, and offer the protective solution, which is we support the rights of women protecting their own bodies or experience, the positive, not the no, but what is the positive you want as the alternative. It's very hard to interpret a no. If I say don't sit down, you don't know what I mean. Does that mean dance? Does that mean run? Does that mean leave? Does that mean stand? So don't grab me. I would make an even more elaborate constructive thing and use force and collective social power to bring that about. And that's, so don't be a wimp and just understand. Is that part? That's part of the answer. There's another part of the answer that I want to get to, which is I see
4 minutes left. Yeah.
Oh, 2 minutes left. Empathy isn't always the answer. Sometimes somebody says something like, I need support. Can you tell me where the bathroom is the one I use. And I could say, I see you're really uncomfortable. I see it's really urgent. You'd really like to know where the bathroom is. I see you're confused why I'm giving you empathy. I see now you're frustrated. I'm just giving you empathy. I'm not telling you where the bathroom is. So empathy isn't the answer to everything. I value it as a tool to inform the action you take. Okay?
So you touched on something earlier, though, when you talked about information. You said, I value the ability to get to information and hear it.
Yeah.
Yet we live in an era unprecedented in world history where fake news, words like fake news and truth that's told is said to be lies, and on a huge scale.
Yeah.
And so I'd like you to comment on that in terms of how it affects all of us as a culture and as a mass of people. It seems like it would put people into terrible confusion.
So thank you. So for me, it's lovely to hear current events brought into things. I have great concern over structures that say there is or there isn't truth or not truth. So my general solution to that is invite education in how you can determine whether news is news or not news, and support others in learning about that. And what I can affect is what I can directly reach. So I have a great concern about the U.S. administration in the United States. I'm not talking about a president or the president, but the government of the United States issuing comments that say there's fake news out in the world, as opposed to let's have the actual news. Let's work on that. Let's be clearer and more about that. I was very excited about more and more outreach because of the internet. I saw back to televised community meetings that started for me starting in the 70s. With Jimmy Carter. That level of community outreach was creating real information, not fake information. And Austin, by the way, is one of the cities in the U.S. that has genuine community outreach. 5,000 people connected to discussions in Austin around topics related to Austin. You could be heard. So that's my response to that is let's use the same tools for more direct interaction, just as we're doing now.
Okay, thank you very much. We're out of time. Give them a hand.